Hey guys, Tbull here. Today we're going to be taking a look at Dimitry Dewey, Nikolay von Essen. What is he? Is he any good? We're going to take a look at the theory in the port briefly, then we're going to look at some real world examples. Increase the minimum ricochet angle of your ship's AP shells. 3.4 currently. If we get them up to 16 legendary 4, that's a 4-degree difference. 4 degrees? That doesn't sound like a lot, does it? Well, we're going to take a look at what this means briefly, and then we're going to go see, can we tell the difference in the wild? So for the purposes of this discussion, when we're talking about angling, this would be a 0-degree angle. This is a 90-degree angle. Okay, at a 90-degree angle, you have no chance to bounce shells that are coming at you. You're a flat broadside. If they penetrate, you're going to take some damage. Okay, when we're steeply angled like this, well, now we're talking about a chance to, or basically a guaranteed chance to bounce. So how angling works briefly, starting at 45-degree angles, 45 degrees, okay, so like roughly like this, you got an incoming shell. Now at this angle, it has a chance to bounce. That's when it begins. Prior to that, anything from 90 degrees to 45 degrees, no chance to bounce, okay? Then we get 45, chance to bounce. Then we hit 30 degrees, something like this, guaranteed bounce, okay? So that's kind of the overview, and there's different surfaces. Like you can see this flat surface pointing directly at the camera here under turret number 2. That's not 30 degrees, okay? It matters exactly what the surface is, but in general, the ship is angled 30 degrees. So, when we're starting with this 45-degree chance to bounce, Dimitry Dewey is on the inspiration of the guy shooting at you. Now, instead of the chance to bounce beginning like this, you got to be a little bit steeper. You got to be 4 degrees steeper like that. Well, that doesn't seem like that big of a deal, does it? Well, sure, but armor angling is very difficult. It's the most difficult thing to do in this game. It's mentally taxing to concentrate on it constantly. It's very easy to be lazy on it. And if you're not doing it perfectly, you're in trouble. So anything we can do to make that more difficult for the person being shot, the harder the game is for him because it's harder for him to stay alive. So you're taking this 45 degrees and we're taking it 41 degrees. That's for most type of guns. But now if we're talking about American heavy cruisers, Pensacola on up, through Des Moines eventually, currently through Baltimore, and the British light cruisers, basically all of them in the game, from Caledon, I believe, all the way up to Minotaur when that happens. Their chance to bounce begins at 30 degrees. Okay, they have enhanced penetration on their AP shells. So I'm starting at 90 degrees. I got to go all the way to 30 degrees to even have a chance to bounce these American shells. And then to get to the guaranteed ricochet, well, in Americans, we got to get to 22.5. Brits, even harder, 15 degrees. So we're talking about basically ships that are like this are going to have a hard time angling against you. And now we're adding 4 degrees to that, going from 30 to 26 degrees. This is very, very difficult to angle against. So that's very powerful. We're going to jump right into some gameplay here. Alright, so now we have kind of the basic idea of what it is here. Here we got a game on Ring. But I'm going to break down kind of my thoughts on whether this thing's worth it or not. Now, getting back to the concept, 4 degrees doesn't sound like that much. But let's start with a situation where we're talking about that 45-degree chance to bounce. And this Dimitry affects just the opening part, the transitioning from no chance to bounce to chance to bounce. Does not have an impact on the back end guaranteed ricochet angle. So keep that in mind. We're just talking about from transitioning in the game's mind from fully broadside to partially angled, okay? But if we're in a German cruiser, let's say we're in the Hipper, we got our AP loaded, we fire at this, not the Pensacola, but let's say we're firing at a Baltimore, it's at 45-degree angles or whatever, 45-degree angle. Now we're in that chance to bounce. But we don't want our shells to be bouncing, especially not in a German cruiser where we're really trying to get those AP shells in there. We need those AP shells to get that damage. So when we're going from 45 degrees to 41 degrees, that's about an 8 to 9% reduction in their ability to angle their armor. Doesn't sound like that big, but if you're go look at the other perks in the game. You go look on Bay or any of the commander inspirations that you use. Normally the values that you're going to see being affected by these inspirations are 3%, 4%, 5%. Usually they max out at 6 for a lot of them. So for most inspirations, they're going to affect your build in the low to mid single digits. Here we're talking about on a standard shell, 8 to 9% reduction in their ability to protect themselves via armor angling, which is what they need to be doing. If we're talking about enhanced penetrations on the Brits, on the Americans, where they have to get to the 30 degrees already, now they're forced to go to 26 degrees, almost directly pointing at you. And that, from a 30 to a 26 degree, I think that's about a 13-14% reduction in their ability to basically armor angle. So what I want you to be doing when we're launching these shots down range, we're not going to be covering this game wholly, but take a look on the map here and see these guys are angled, right? Some of these battleships pointed 45 degrees away, but you know, some of the shots maybe we're already going to get in penetration because we got the enhanced American penetration. Some of them we're not going to really know how close he was to the border, and this is one of those perks where you're not going to really ever know for sure did that affect it or not. Okay, let's say I'm in Bay. I'm sailing around, my concealment, instead of being 5.3 on whatever destroyer I am, happens to be 4.9. Okay, well, I can tell if I'm not getting spotted at 5.2, that's due to my Bay build, right? That's due to the inspiration. Very easy to tell in that situation. Perks that are dealing with penetration, armor penetration shells, penetration values, angling like this, you're never going to know. You can't even recreate them. Like we were briefly alluding to earlier, sometimes we're going to be hitting flat surfaces on an angled ship. Sometimes we'll be hitting a weird piece of armor. Who knows? I mean, there's so many factors going into these shells when they strike the target to determine whether or not, you know, they're actually going to penetrate, whether they're going to hit the citadel, whatever they're going to do. Who knows? Complicated, okay? But what we're basically doing with this thing is making it almost 10%, almost 15% harder for these guys, depending on what shell we're shooting, to protect themselves with angling. And that's very, very powerful. And armor angling it takes a lot of mental, you know, concentration. It's the hardest thing to do consistently throughout an entire game, is focus on the angling. Focus on the angling against 3 or 4 guys that are shooting at you. It gets very complicated. So anything we can do to add to the difficulty of accomplishing this objective, keeping themselves safe, for the opponents, that's very powerful, okay? So like this Nevada right here, he's basically mostly broadside. We're not in the chance to bounce territory, so we know Dimitry didn't have any effect on that shot that just landed there a moment ago. We also know the American enhanced penetrations didn't. But some of these guys, when we're going to be shooting at them, battleships, cruisers, they're angled away. Well, if they're hovering at that 45, they're hovering at that 30 degrees, and they're starting to cross that, well, Dimitry does do that, okay? And it actually it has real-world consequences for these guys. You can see he's starting angling a little bit there. Hard to protect yourself when you got this build going here. So currently I have it on 3 lines of cruisers, and I put it on my Hyde build. Now Hyde, he's the German Halloween commander. Hopefully he's going to come back. He's a very strong commander. I think a lot of you guys would like him if you don't have him yet. But he has this perk called Alley Dodd in the slot too. That adds 8 degrees of basically the same thing. So it's like a double Dimitry Dewey. Instead of 4 degrees maxed, he adds 8 degrees there, so he's taken the 45 degrees that the German battleships are shooting at, reducing it by 8. Now we're talking 38, and now that we slapped Dimitry Dewey on there as well, we're down to 34. That's almost like as good of penetration angling, you know, that we have in the Americans and the Brit cruiser lines. So very, very powerful. But currently I have it on the American cruisers, the heavy cruisers, the British light cruisers. These are the ones that already have that enhanced penetration, and we're just trying to make it even better. Okay, so we're basically taking the main strength of those shells, and we're doubling down on it. And I do have it on the Germans, the German cruisers. If you play a lot of German cruisers, you probably know when you get a lot of AP shells into your targets, that's when the damage piles up. When you get a lot of HE shells into your targets, well, that's when the damage kind of dwindles. Not the most high damage dealing HE generally. AP, when you can get it to work, very, very good. So we're trying to keep that shell as effective as possible. So those are my 3 cruiser lines. And battleships, I was thinking about this a moment ago before we started doing the video here. I could see a world where someday we wind up having it on basically all the battleships. Okay, right? You can make the case for Kedrov, you can make the case for Cunningham, Scharnhorst. Those are kind of the universal battleship traits. Same thing with Dimitry Dewey, right? If you're doing battleships according to the way I would recommend playing them, you're shooting AP almost every single salvo. And if that's the case, in almost every single salvo you launch, it's going to be that much harder for the guy to defend themselves. And battleship armor wrangling, that wins and loses battles. So I'm getting pretty close to just trying them out on like all my lines and just seeing overall, are we going to see some nice results. And again, it's just going to be, it's one of those things where you can't sit there and say, I know for a fact that that one was due to Dimitry Dewey being as an inspiration. We got that penetration there where it normally would have been a ricochet or a chance to ricochet. Because you don't even know. We're talking about a chance to ricochet. Some of the shells that are hitting even without Dimitry Dewey on there will ricochet. Some of them won't, you know. So we're already talking about something that's got a lot of randomized, you know, components to it. But now we're just kind of tightening it up. Just making sure that we're increasing the reliability of our own shells that we're launching, and from the enemy's standpoint, making it more difficult for them to angle and protect themselves. So that's kind of my case for Dewey. I talk about using him a lot during the streams. Dimitry Dewey, that is. Von Essen. A lot of you guys, when I'm talking about him on streams, kind of roll your eyes, or you disagree, or you say, well, that doesn't sound like that big of a deal. And I tried to come up with a good way to explain it. Hopefully this did a good job in that regard. But whether or not you're convinced or whether or not you've tried it out, I don't know. That's where I kind of want to get into the comments here and start to see what you guys think. Does it, hopefully you at least understand my theory behind it. And again, we're talking about inspirations that are making the game 8% more difficult for your opponents, 14% more difficult for your opponents. That's a huge boost, as opposed to, you know, boosting our reload by 4% or our concealment by a 4, 5, 6%, whatever it is, you know. Much more impactful in terms of actual oomph from these inspirations. So if you understand that, that alone should give you kind of reason to start thinking about, maybe I do want to level him up. But then once we got into the nitty gritty and you see how hard it is for these guys to already angle to begin with, once we talk about the numbers, then we break it down and we're seeing 8, 9, 10, 14, 13, 14% reductions here for their ability to basically protect themselves. Well, then it becomes very difficult. So that's kind of the case that I got for this. I do want to hear whether you guys are on board, whether you think it sounds interesting or you think it sounds like Balderdash. So let me know in the comments below. But that'll do it for this one, guys. We're just chasing the destroyer down. Not much more action here. If you do enjoy the video, though, I would hope you please hit the thumbs up. It does help the video. It does help the channel. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing. We got lots of World of Warships coming all the time for you. Questions, comments, leave below. Love to hear from you. And we'll see y'all later. Peace.